Hey folks, Stephen J of Open Mop Productions here, and I thought I'd go ahead and do a kind of running commentary on Save the Astronaut 3D. I released this last year, uh, and the express objective was to make a game that was in the color palette of a CGA DOS first-person shooter, and I think I succeeded pretty well. I adhered to the limited 16 color palette and resolution limitations and things like that. It's not an easy ask when you get right down to it because the CGA palette is just it's kind of awful. Um, but it started out as kind of just a simple little idea. Could I do this? And much like with the original Save the Astronaut, it was born out of kind of paring things down and just focusing on a core idea and seeing that idea all the way through to the end line. Uh, you can get lost in the weeds with complicated, massive projects or projects that end up ballooning. You know, you begin adding more features and more features and more features, and it becomes unwieldy for a single person to actually work with. And a lot of them, the roll of the dice is that you're probably not going to succeed. You're probably going to fail if you start out colossal. So I thought, well, back in the day, in the 90s, small teams, even, one or two or even three person teams were developing games kind of like this. Uh, Certainly places like Softdisk, after the id people packed up and left and formed their own company. Softdisk was producing games with very small teams, uh, sequels to like Catacombs 3D and things of that nature. And that's kind of where this came from. Is I wanted to see what I could do on my own uh, in creating a proper retro boomer shooter. And it started out with let's take away the mouse aim, let's take away crouching and jumping, let's make it as purely Wolfenstein 3D or any of those games as close as we can to that. Um, Easy FPS Editor is actually built on, to my understanding, it's built on the skeleton of Raycast Game Maker, which was pretty much just a Wolfenstein clone. And so from there came the idea of let's make it a sequel to my first game. Let's franchise it. Uh, and forward from that, it was like, okay, do we do EGA? Do we do CGA? Do we do VGA? What kind of colors, do we want to work with? What kind of style do we want to make it? Not, the one thing I wanted to do, because it is such a rarity these days, is to do a kid-friendly game. A game that children can play, and it's exciting and it's got action, but it's not grotesque and violent. It's child friendly. Certainly, kids in their maybe 7 to 8 range can play this and not be worried that there's excessive violence and carnage. It's just not something you see much of anymore. Kind of in the spirit of Chex Quest. Uh, People forget, particularly as we get older. Games are, at least originally, for kind of the child demographic for kids. For young adults and kids and young teenagers and us grumpy or old men, we tend to think it's all for us, and it's actually not. I kind of think that that's a void. It's particularly in the indie space. I don't think a lot of developers actually do think about the younger audience or for family entertainment, things like that. And I'm a big proponent of it. I think it's important. Uh, Design wise, then from that is the idea of, well, we have to keep it simple. It has to be easy to read. It has to be exciting, obviously, but um, even with thinking all of that and the numerous tests I did, I still saw some people struggling to navigate, uh, and chalk some of that up to the color palette. There's a lot of gray in this game, which can be disorienting. Also, shout out to Brandon Bloom. He did the soundtrack for this, and it brought a tear to my eye to hear it. I gave him the very primitive NES music that I did for the first game, and asked him to kind of take the motifs and things of that nature and reincorporate them into a new soundtrack. And it's just great to hear those little tunes that I made fleshed out into these really fantastic OPL ad lib kind of, the music of that time, of the early 90s. For me, there was no better time than probably 1993 to 2005 in gaming. I think that was a time of such great revolution and experimentation. And if you just look at those years, it's about 11, 12 year span of gaming, the number of just absolutely legendary games that came out in that time frame, the number of founding people who found their footing and created legendary games. That will always be my favorite era of games. I haven't seen anything that compares. So the other thing to kind of keep in mind as I was designing this was I knew I wanted it to be a shareware length experience, which, for those of you kiddies who don't know what shareware is, back in the day, game developers would give you a piece of the game for free, and then if you wanted more, you would back order it, either via phone or mail, and they would send it to you. And often those games would be, they would have some kind of a thing in like order now and things like that. But for the shareware length, it's usually like one episode out of 3 or something like that, one episode out of 4, so you get a quarter of the game or a third of the game. Usually it's between 5 to 7 levels of the game. There are some pretty notorious ones like the Doom shareware, or the Duke Nukem 3D shareware. Those were very popular. Wolfenstein 3D's shareware episode, of course, was very, very popular. I don't know how many times I installed that on computers growing up. But that was kind of the length I wanted to go for. Again, keeping scope honed in and focused, and knowing, okay, this is the limit of what I'm doing. I'm not going beyond this. I'm not going to make 50 levels and 500 enemies and add in all these crazy features. I'm actually paring it down and focusing. And overall, it took about 3.5 months to develop the game, and I intended it initially to take about a month, and that's kind of typical of game development. It will usually take about 3 times as long as you think it will. That's just the way it works, because there's always complications and setbacks, and when you're developing something as a solo dev, burnout is a big thing, because you're doing everything: the sound effects, textures, programming, level design, and you have to have fresh ideas for all of those things at all times. And that's just not physically attainable. Sometimes you have to take a break and, come back to it later. But if I'm totally honest, I'm actually very proud of this little game. I wish it had reached a bigger audience than it did. I think more people would have enjoyed it if they even knew it existed. Unfortunately, that didn't happen, but I still enjoy it. I enjoy it for me. I enjoy it for the exercise that it brought to me. I enjoyed it for the collaboration I got to have with Brandon Bloom. I enjoy it for its kind of ease and simplicity, and it reminds me of a simpler time in PC gaming, and a simpler time in life. I do still remember seeing Wolfenstein 3D for the very first time on my cousin's 486. And he was playing it with a joystick for some reason, which I always thought was weird. And many, 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 many years later, I actually was able to track down the same joystick that he was playing with for that. And it's not the way to play a first-person shooter at all. It's a flight stick. It's for fighting, or air combat and space combat games. It's not for first-person shooters, but back in the 90s, people did all kinds of crazy stuff like that. But back on level design, one of the things that I wanted to make sure to do was every level have a distinctive flavor to it, whether we're talking the music or just the color palette. So, for example, this one, dark ceiling, blue floor. We're going for kind of a tech, kind of a machinery, servers, kind of like this is the brains of this ship that you're on. Uh, and So each level has something about it that makes it distinct from the last one. So you're never playing just the same thing over and over again. And I'll be honest with you, I think I would have run out of ideas if I had tried to make it any longer than I did. Because I was pushing the envelope every which way that I could think to, and that within the limited color palette. It's not that there aren't more ideas, but when you're dealing with literally 16 colors, and you have to be aware of not just making things unique, but also the way, say, the weapon sprites interact with the floor, and how things get blurred together, and so on and so forth. You had to be very careful with the application of color, so that things that you want to stand out actually stand out. You could put, the limited colors that you have, you could just throw them everywhere. But then you're going to have a hard problem for the player of readability. Readability is one of those things that in the indie space is not talked about nearly as much as it should be. It is so important when you're designing your levels, designing your art, that everything is readable to the player. That it is at a glance, whether it's your enemy design, whether it's the level layout, what you're trying to communicate to the player, whether it's lighting, all of these things have to communicate to the player. One example, very simple. Green means go, red means stop. And you want to be consistent with your application. Because the thing a lot of people don't understand is that as a game designer, you're speaking to the player all the time. You're telling the player things. You're communicating where you want them to go, where they shouldn't go, what is a healing item, what isn't. So this is another prime example where we're changing it up. We went from a very dark map to this very bright map, and this section of the map, or this section of the game, is called the Promenade. And the idea here, you may, if you're a Star Trek fan, you might know that word from Star Trek Deep Space Nine. They called the kind of the economic shopping area of the station the Promenade, and I always liked that word, so I just kind of hijacked it to use it here. But this is basically a shopping mall on the ship, and the music in the background is supposed to be kind of like shopping mall music or elevator music or something like that. It's supposed to feel very peppy and relaxing and just charming. I really wanted there to be a lot of charm here. And again, keeping to the limits. There were things where it was like, Easy FPS Editor lets you use modifiers. You can make different shapes to the walls and stuff. I didn't do that. I adhered strictly to the 64 by 64 by 64 regiment. There are no unusual shapes. It's all 64 by 64 by 64 cubes. And, it limits are not your enemy. Like people often say, the sky's the limit, but really, do you want your limitations to be that big? Because you're going to have to fill that. People are going to have that expectation. Limiting the color palette, limiting the design elements, focusing down to a particular art style, and having these objectives. And this was all kind of upfront that I was, very, very early on. I was laying down these rules so that I made sure when it was time to build the thing, it fit. And it's like some people were saying, well, you need to add more decorations, you need to add more this and more that. And it's like, well, sure, I could add a lot more. I could go on forever. But the thing is would they have done that back in the days of, kilobytes of space, where games were measured in the hundreds of kilobytes, and a megabyte and a half was quite an ask. Your floppy disk are 1.4 megabytes. Like, it's got to fit in that theoretical space, and obviously, being easy FPS, it doesn't fit in that space legitimately. But if you were to take the assets that I made from this and program a proprietary DOS engine, a raycaster engine, to run this, that's how big it would be. That's how tight that would fit. So it's important to stay true to what you intend to do. You don't just want to do things because they're cool. It's important to have cool things in a game. That's what makes them, exciting and interesting. But and novelty is certainly important. But I think it's actually far more important to be focused, to keep your design language in check. I was talking with an associate of mine the other day about the Half-Life beta, the Half-Life 2 beta, because he's working on an easy FPS project, and he was talking about adding more weapons, and I was like, well, yeah, but more weapons is great, but what purpose do they serve? What's the role that they serve in your arsenal? Because he's been working on it for quite a while, and he's got it pretty balanced, and he's got a pretty full-fledged arsenal. Everything's kind of got a niche that it fills. So adding an additional weapon, it begs the question: what does this weapon do in the grand scheme of the arsenal? What's its purpose? What is the focus? And ultimately, he decided not to go with it. But one of the examples I cited was Half-Life 2. And if you've ever played the prototypes, you know that they had, like guns on guns on guns. There were all kinds of guns that got cut from the final game. And a lot of them, well, I won't say a lot of them, but a sizable portion of them were machine gun variations. And it's like, you got an AK-47, you got a MP5, it's like, well, they all kind of serve the same purpose. Why do you need all those guns? Pare it down. Have one really good one. You don't need 15 of them. It doesn't do anything but confuse the player. It's like, what do all these guns do? What's the purpose of it? What am I using this for in combat? And a lot of weapons just don't get used because they don't have a purpose. Design. You want to think about your design as much as making it look cool and, all the flashy effects that you can put into it. You want to make sure that that you're thinking about what you're making, that you're thinking about the design, that you think about what the player's experience is going to be. And that is not to say that I know everything. I have spent a long time learning just how much I don't know. And I certainly think there are some shortcomings in this project, but I did ultimately achieve what I wanted to, and that's what matters to me. And as a designer, if you are a game designer, that's what should matter to you as well, that you achieve your goals as an artist and a designer. And don't let somebody talk you out of something that you have a strong feeling about. Analyze it and figure out why it's important to you. And if you come to the conclusion that it doesn't make sense, then don't do it. But it's always important to be analytical and to think about these things. So it's interesting, too, one of the things in Easy FPS Editor is, although it's basically a boomer shooter engine, it does not inherently have any kind of score system. There's no secret checks or, enemy kill counter or anything like that. That's all exclusionary. Or it's not in there. You have to make it. So all of this stuff with the stat screen and everything, I had to kind of figure out how to do that. And a Russian developer named Keisha, he had done a Wolfenstein 3D remake, and he included a stat screen at the end of his demonstration, and I kind of took that and looked at it and expanded it to do all the things I wanted to do. But it was an insightful thing because it really showed me the power of even just a little basic scripting can really expand this thing. And some people have taken it to incredible lengths, like to the point that the engine is almost unrecognizable in point of fact. So again, changing mood, we went from this bright, happy shopping center into we're now on the command deck of the ship. We're approaching the bridge, and there's an alarm going off, and the music is, almost an ambience. It's an atonal kind of haunting thing with the alarm going off. And again, props to Brandon Bloom. He did a great job on the soundtrack. It hit exactly where I wanted it to hit, and fantastic work. So I'm a big science fiction nerd. I love Star Trek and the alien universe and all kinds of space-bound science fiction. I'm a sucker for it. I've been hooked to it since I was a kid, and so some of this is speaking to kind of that Star Trekian vibe, and in general, the general science fiction vibe. But my idea was like this was a pretty nice, clean spaceship, and then these slime monsters stowed away on board and have made it a mess. And um, you could almost imagine something like that happening in Star Trek: The Next Generation, where the ship gets all gooped up and stuff, and they're running around with phasers trying to clean it up and stuff. That was kind of what I was going for, and again, that plays to the kind of family friendly, kid friendly vibe of the whole thing. The conventional kind of look nowadays is very industrial, inspired by the Alien movies and things like that. And I didn't really feel like doing that. I didn't want to go down that route with this one. I wanted to, even in the dark times, I wanted it to be cheerful and kind of fun and exciting. A lot of these, if you've noticed up to now, I've been interacting with a lot of things, different uh, walls in the environment, and they don't really serve a purpose. That it's just kind of, if the player is inquisitive enough, they get rewarded with a message of some kind of, something. There's some kind of a reward for exploring. It's not necessarily that you're getting ammunition or points or anything, but you're just getting a little bit of feedback from the game, and that's always important. One of the things in modern games for probably about a decade plus now that has annoyed me is you have these fantastic landscapes and layouts and designs, and you can't do anything with any of it. It's all inert and static and boring. And I grew up in a time where game designers wanted you to poke things with a stick. Duke Nukem 3D is kind of my gold standard for first-person shooter design because every level is loaded with secrets. There's all kinds of things going on, and there's Easter eggs and jokes and gags and props and this, that, and the other. And to me, it's like it's great to make the game and to have fantastic shooting and for all that stuff to feel good. But then the extra layer, the layer that's going to bring people back again, and is having uh, all of those layers of interactivity and things to explore and things to uncover and discover, and the humor that you can inject into your game, the personality that you can give your game by doing that. The other aspect of this level in the atmospheric kind of tone and the alarm and everything is that I wanted to be we did our first 3 levels, and now this is the penultimate level, and we kind of want to build the tension. There's foreboding and there's dread, and now we're seeing more and more of this slime everywhere. So where's the origin point? How are we getting out of this? There's a lot of little design cues. Kind of. I won't say it's environmental storytelling, because it might be just a tad too primitive for that, but kind of. It's similar to Aliens, where the Marines walk into the hive. You're entering the unknown now. And so we're coming up now on the final level. This is the boss level. And for this one, I wanted to really up the stakes. We're carrying on the alarm floor from the previous map with the red flashing. But now we can see the sky above the ship, because we're at the top of the ship, and there's supposed to be like a big open window or something. And so we've got this big vista overhead, and we've got this percussive orchestral score. And my kind of direction to Brandon Bloom on the music for this one was, I just want Bishop's Countdown from Aliens. And if you know the soundtrack to Aliens and you play this track back to back with Bishop's Countdown, you'll hear it immediately. It's one of the most infamous pieces of orchestral music James Horner ever produced, used time and time again in movie trailers over the years. But it really gives this kind of that sense of finality and the scope that I wanted it to have. And interesting thing about this sky is that it's actually from the first game. I had to scale it up and adjust it a little bit, but that moon is actually the moon that you're on in the first game, and this is the ship that picked you up to rescue you. So it literally is a continuation of the first game. Complete genre shift, obviously. I've had a couple of my friends ask me if I will ever go back and do a third one, and I've thought about it, and I won't say it will never happen. It's certainly a possibility. I do have some ideas for it. But honestly, I'm pretty happy with how this worked out here. As you can see there, I got completely blown away by a barrel. You got to watch out for those rogue barrels. Again, keeping kind of with the Chex Quest vibe, the health pickups are all like fast food. It's Space Cola or Space Shake and Starburger or whatever. It was, it's just kind of kiddie and a little silly, but it's still fun. I like this stuff. I wish more people would do things like this, where it's got an innocence to it. It's not vulgar and crass and out to shock you or gross you out. It's just, we're here to have fun. At the end of the day, that's what games are all about, is having fun. And that doesn't always mean that you've got to reach for the X-rated file cabinet. You can do something that's a little bit more wholesome and sweet and colorful, and not everything needs to be disgusting. One of the things about that sky that is kind of amusing is it's massively over-resed compared to everything else in the game. And I had to do that because of the way the engine was scaling it. The stars were gargantuan. They were massive. They were, taking up a huge real estate in the sky, and it's like they don't really, it doesn't really have the scope to it that I want it to. So I had to make it about 4 to 6 times bigger than it was to get the stars to actually scale properly. It's convoluted, but it works. I mean, I don't think anybody's computer was really hurt by it. That was one of the other benefits of taking the avenue of designing the game in this way, is that it's not processor intensive. It's not bottlenecking the CPU. It's very simple. That was one of the more difficult aspects, was to figure out how to make the boss even remotely a challenge. So what I decided to do was to give him the ability to um, shoot you when you shoot him. So when he enters his pain state, he returns fire at you. Just to keep you moving, so you couldn't stand still. You had to keep moving and shooting, and it did help because I did notice that a number of people were actually struggling with him. So I was like, okay, well that's good. I don't want the final boss to be a cakewalk. I want it to be potentially a challenge, so that it's an earned victory and not just a given one. And here's the gauntlet. We're running towards what is supposed to be the escape pod, and we collect the crew, and there it is, the final level of Save the Astronaut 3D. And I missed a crew member somehow. And here we are coming up on the final credits. Oh, thank you to everybody who watched this commentary. I'm sure I rambled a lot, but I appreciate you coming along for this journey. I hope that you check out the game and actually play it. Thank you to everybody in the Easy FPS community, and Brandon Bloom, my mother, my girlfriend. You're all amazing. Thank you for seeing me through this project, and I can't wait to do more projects in the future. God bless y'all.